hat mich verlaufen.
Das ist jetzt aber wirklich das letzte Mal. Oder?
We decided to start doing commercials now for supplement. Is that cute or what? I just love that commercial. That kid made a nightly adventure journey just to ride in a Mercedes Benz. And that is so appropriate for this message. Living an adventurous life is really what this message is all about today. Life is a crazy journey that begins when we're born and ends when we die. And in the middle of those two significant events, we are faced with a multitude of decisions on how we will live as we travel through this crazy journey called life. Some of those decisions that we will make along the way will be wise ones. Some of those will be foolish ones. I'll tell you a little story here. When I graduated high school in 1970, how many of you weren't even born in 1970? Most of you, yeah. So I went on a summer road trip with my best friend, Bill Silverman. We traveled from Los Angeles, where we lived, up the coastline, all the way to Canada, then across the Trans-Canadian Highway, then back across the United States. It was a crazy adventure, but it was largely a trip of fools. Bill and I left Los Angeles with only $100 between us. We were flat broke by the time we reached the Oregon border. Luckily, we ran into someone in Portland who paid us to paint a house, and in a few days, we were back on the road again with a few $100 in our pockets. But before we left Oregon, we found a stray border collie that we named Tripper. It was 1970. Tripper became a great road companion for us, but he chewed up my car seats the first time we left him alone in my car. So we basically sat on metal springs the rest of the trip. When we reached British Columbia, we visited a pub in the popular Gastown area and immediately made some local Canadian drinking friends. And after a couple of beers, our new Canadian friends began to question whether or not we were truly Americans or not. Of course, we said we were, and so they said, "Prove it." And eager to prove that we were Americans, I pulled out my wallet, passed it around to the group so they could see my California driver's license. And a few minutes later, when I tried to retrieve my wallet, you know where this is going? My new Canadian buddies kept saying, "What wallet?" And as they exited the bar laughing, I realized that we were scammed, and I never saw my wallet, my ID, or my painting money again. And so with no U.S. ID and only Bill's half of the painting money, we hit the road, headed east along the Trans-Canadian Highway. Next stop, Banff National Park in the Canadian Rockies, which is one of the most beautiful spots in the world. That is until Bill and I made our mark on it. One night in our campground, we made a huge bonfire, and to get the fire going, we poured lighter fluid on it, which was working great, at least for a while. Back then, if you all remember, lighter fluid was much more significantly flammable than it is today, and while pouring the fluid on the fire, the flames traveled all the way up to the opening of the can, and it virtually exploded in my hands. I panicked and tossed it into some nearby vegetation, and it took mobilizing the entire campground to get that fire under control about 2 hours later. I'm pretty sure I heard some campers cheering as Bill and Tripper and I left the campground the next morning, sitting on our bumpy metal springs in my car. I wish I could tell you the rest of if I had time to tell all the other foolish stories on this trip, but all I can say is back then, I wasn't the sharpest knife in the drawer. So we're currently in a series in the book of Proverbs called Sophia. That's the Greek word for wisdom. Sophia, the beauty of wisdom, is what our series is called. Today I'm going to talk about wisdom for the journey, which is something I could have really used back in 1970. Since we're all on a crazy journey called life, it's important to know that there's a foolish way to journey through this life, and there's a wise way to journey through this life. And today we're going to look at the wise way, which ultimately leads to an exciting, adventurous journey, but with slightly more meaningful results than the ones I took in 1970. And to begin, we're going to look at something called the path to life. The path to life. Listen to this. Proverbs 14:12 says, "There is a way that seems right to us, but in the end it leads to death." There is a way that feels right, but it leads to destruction. I remember years ago seeing a bumper sticker that said, "Hire a teenager while they still know everything." You ever see that? And thinking we are know-it-alls is really a true, it's just basic to our human nature. There's just something innate within each of us that makes us think that we're experts at everything. And it starts at a very young age. In fact, this innate know-it-all attitude is why some of you remember an early television show back in the 50s. Some of you will remember this, called Kids Say the Darndest Things. A lot of the reruns are on TV. It was a huge success for Art Linkletter, who started that show, and later on, Bill Cosby. Watch this clip and see why we're know-it-alls.
He raises funds.
He's a fundraiser. Gee, that's wonderful. Who's he raising funds for?
Himself.
By the way, who's the boss in your house, your mother or your dad?
Both of them.
Hey, you're a diplomat, are you?
No, I'm a Catholic Baptist.
Mark Green, with Thanksgiving and all, we're supposed to be thankful. What are you thankful for?
I'm an American.
Ah, you are an American. That's good. I'm glad you're thankful for that. You know what an American is? What is an American?
Someone who lives in California.
Very good. Who's the most important man in the world today, in your opinion?
George Washington.
George Washington. That's right. He's married, isn't he?
Yes, sir.
You know who his wife is?
Miss America.
Roxanne Burns. What's your favorite Bible story?
About the wine
Where? Where did it happen?
at the wedding.
At the wedding. How did he make the wine?
With his power.
Out of what did he make the wine?
Water.
That's right. Now, when Jesus made the water into wine at the wedding, that's the story. What do we learn from that story?
We learned the more wine we get, the better the wedding is.
Who took the first bite?
Adam. Then Eve.
Boy, I bet God was mad.
Yeah, then God sent them to hell, and they transferred onto Los Angeles.
How did God punish Eve? What did he do with Eve? He made her what?
Oh, a housewife.
Isn't that awesome? So obviously this innate know-it-all attitude that we have has a humorous side, but also has a dangerous side, because according to Proverbs 4:12, there's a way that seems right to us, and since we're by nature know-it-alls, we're certain it's the path to take. But it often ends up leading us down a destructive road. You know, the hippie movement in the 60s and 70s, which I was a part of, is a good example of this. The hippie movement started out as a liberation movement. We were going to be free. Women burned their bras, LSD expanded our minds, free sex attested to the deep love that we had for each other. But after a few years, the hippie movement turned dark as countless people overdosed on drugs, millions became addicts. Free sex turned into destructive STDs and unwanted pregnancies, and control freaks like Charles Manson and Jim Jones dominated the headlines. It seemed right to us at the beginning of this movement, but for many it ended up in disaster. It led me to a destructive cocaine addiction, and if it weren't for the grace of God, it eventually grabbed my life. I might have ended up dead like many of my friends did. Some people buy into the American dream. They make success and materialism their journey. But they often end up a prisoner to the things that they own or to the debt they've accumulated along the way. Others take alternative spiritual or religious paths to find enlightenment, only to discover that they don't deliver the goods and often alienate themselves from their family and their friends. And still others try extreme adventure, thinking that the thrill will make life more exhilarating, but the problem is that the risk needs to keep increasing more and more. So we all start out life as know-it-alls, and that's why there's a way that seems right to us, but the way that seems right to us isn't always the right way. And that's where the role of wisdom comes in. The Greek philosopher Socrates once said, "The only true wisdom is knowing you know nothing." And I've said many times over the years that my definition of genuine maturity is coming to a place in your life when you realize just how little you really know. That is maturity, my friends. Unfortunately, many of us have to journey down a few dead-end roads and experience a lot of pain and loss in our lives before we become mature enough to seek wisdom outside of ourselves. That's what happened to a man named Job in the Bible. Job experienced a lot of loss, and he thought that he had all the answers about that loss to those difficult questions. But this is what he said to God after realizing just how little he actually knew. In Job chapter 42, verse 3 through 6, Job says, "God, you asked, who is this that questions my wisdom with such ignorance? It is I. And I was talking about things I knew nothing about, things far too wonderful for me. God, you said, listen, and I will speak. I have some questions for you, and you must answer them. And I had only heard about you before, but now I have seen you with my own eyes. I take back everything I said, and I sit in dust and ashes, and I show my repentance." These are words from a man who learned to be very wise through loss. Maybe some of you here today have journeyed down a dead-end road or two. I know I have. Maybe you've experienced a significant loss or two because of your know-it-all attitude. All I can say is, welcome to humanity. We've all been there. But I also have to say, it's time to grow up. Rabbi Saul, the Apostle Paul, had this in mind in 1 Corinthians 13, 11 through 12, when he said, "When I was a child, I spoke and I thought and I reasoned as a child. But when I grew up, I put away childish things. Now we see things imperfectly as a cloudy mirror." It's just, you can't see things right on your own. But then, speaking of eternity, we will see everything with perfect clarity. "All that I know now is impartial and complete, but then I'll know everything completely, just as God knows me completely." And so he's talking about the fact that there's a time in everyone's life when you have to grow up and realize that we don't know everything. That the best we have is a cloudy view. And so kids do say the darndest things. But what the Apostle Paul is saying here in this passage is that there's a time in everyone's life when we realize that we must seek wisdom outside of ourselves. Why? Because it's a matter of life or death. And not just for us, but for our family and friends as well. God says in Deuteronomy chapter 30, verse 19, "Today I have given you the choice between life and death, between blessings and curses." Which one? Life and death or blessing and curses? "Now I call on heaven and earth to witness the choice that you make. Oh, that you would choose life, so that you and your descendants might live." And so maturity is coming to a place to realize that we don't really know anything, and then seeking wisdom outside of ourselves. You with me so far on that? Okay, and the wisdom we are to seek on the path to life is really the path of boundaries. Listen to this. Proverbs 29:18 says, "Where there is no revelation, the people cast off restraint, but happy, blessed is he who keeps the law," who keeps the Torah. Now, because in the context of this passage, revelation in this case is God's instruction in the Torah, which are simply boundaries or limits for our lives. And according to this passage, those who live within these boundaries have happy lives. Those who don't live within those boundaries live aimless, out of control lives. That's what that means. To cast off restraint means there's no boundaries. You just go everywhere, aimlessly. The New Living Translation says it this way in Proverbs 20:19. It says, "When people do not accept divine guidance, they run wild. But whoever obeys the law is joyful." Now, most people wrongly think that freedom is found in the absence of boundaries. True freedom means there's no limits, right? There's nothing. But listen to this, because this is so important to get. True freedom is not found in the absence of boundaries. True freedom is found in the presence of healthy boundaries, the right boundaries. Take this goldfish in this bowl here. You know, the goldfish is probably thinking, I hate it here. This is boring. My life is too confined. It's too limited. I need more freedom. And the cat is thinking, set him free. But obviously, it's in the best interest of the goldfish to stay within the safety of the fishbowl. And God gives us healthy boundaries or limits to live by that are for our protection and for the protection of those around us as well. Look at Galatians 5:14 says, the entire law is summed up in a single command: love your neighbor as yourself. And so living within healthy boundaries is how we love others, it's how we love ourselves, and this is why we don't cheat on our spouses. This is why we stay home when we're contagious with something. This is why we give a portion of our money to help those less fortunate. This is why we discipline our children. All these boundaries are found in the Torah, in the law. And they're not only to protect us and our neighbors, they're to ensure that we live happy, successful lives. Joshua 1:8 says, do not let this book of the law depart from your mouth. Meditate on it day and night so that you may be careful to do everything written in it. Then you will be prosperous and successful. Psalm 1, verse 1 through 3 says, blessed or happy is the one who does not walk in the counsel of the wicked or stand in the way that sinners take or sit in the seat of company of mockers, but whose delight, whose joy is in the law of the Lord and who meditates on his law day and night. He's a person like a tree planted by streams of water, which yields its fruit in season, whose leaf does not wither. Whatever they do prospers. If you think about it, you know, the Jewish people are some of the most successful people on this planet as a group. In January, the New York Times did an article called What Drives Success? This is what they said about Jewish success in America. Jewish success is the most historically fraught and the most broad-based. Although Jews make up only about 2% of the United States adult population, they account for a third of the current Supreme Court, over 2/3 of Tony Award-winning lyricists and composers, about a third of American Nobel laureates, and about 20% of the wealthiest 400 Americans. In 70 AD, the Romans exiled the Jewish people to the four corners of the world. We went everywhere. But wherever we went, we prospered as a people, which was usually the pretext for persecuting us. And the reason for our repeated success throughout history has not been because Jews, listen to this, it's not been because Jews have an obsessive ambition to be successful. It's because we have an obsessive ambition to live within the healthy boundaries that God gave us in the Torah. That's the obsession. For Jews, faith, family, business ethics, morality, sobriety, human compassion, community, self-sacrifice are all part of what it meant to keep the law or to be Torah observant. And it's from living within these healthy boundaries that we Jews have found repeated success wherever we were scattered in the world. America was built on these biblical principles and values, which is why our nation has prospered for the last 238 years. And it is these same biblical principles and values that can bring us success as well. If instead of making our primary goal success, we make our primary goal living within God's healthy boundaries. God promises this. You can trust him in this. Because true freedom is not found in the absence of boundaries. True freedom is found in the presence of healthy boundaries. And so taking the path to life, which is reaching the place of maturity to realize that we know nothing, and then seeking wisdom outside of ourselves, and then getting on the path of boundaries, which is where true freedom and success is found by living within those God's healthy limits. This is what the wisdom of journey is all about. One last verse that summarizes both these points from Proverbs 3, 5, and 6. It says this. Most of you are familiar with this. Trust in the Lord. Trust in the Lord with all of your heart, every bit of it. And lean not on your own understanding. Don't be a know-it-all. In all your ways, think about all your ways. All your ways. In your work, at school, in your thought life, in your finances, in all your relationships, in the way you do sports, in the way you eat, in the way you drink. In all your ways, acknowledge Him. And what's the promise? He'll make your path straight. Trust in, lean not, acknowledge. Trust in God, lean not on yourself, acknowledge Him. And you know, it's interesting because a lot of people hear a message like this and they see a passage about a straight path and immediately think, straight path, the straight and narrow. And they're like that fish in the fishbowl. That sounds like a boring life. That sounds like I have to live this kind of lily-white, passive life, keep my nose clean, follow all the rules, don't color outside the lines, play it safe, nobody gets hurt. But it's exactly the opposite of what that really is. The straight path is not a boring path. It's an exciting, adventurous path. Because when we trust God, and we don't lean on our own understanding, and then we acknowledge Him in everything that we do, God frees us up from a boring life. And He leads us down an exciting life as we step out in faith. Little steps in the beginning where you learn to trust God, bigger steps, and bigger steps. As you listen to Him and He leads you to do bigger and greater and more exciting things on the journey. That's how the journey should be. Years ago, Andrew and I used to lead youth ministry. We led youth ministry for 6 years, early on in our walk. And we were crazy back then. We're smarter now. That's a hard ministry, youth ministry. But we had a lot more energy back then. And we used to take the youth group to a summer camp up in the Sequoia National Park, Central California, called Hume Lake. Anybody know Hume Lake? Yeah, it's an awesome place. It's a premier camp. It's amazing. Beautiful. And, oh my gosh, can't say enough about Hume Lake. I love that place. But they have a ropes course. And one year, Andrew decided to take the ropes course. And it's kind of cool. You know, you start off on these kind of really easy, they put a harness on you, you know, safety harness. And you start off on these easy things, and, you know, you kind of walk these things, and you climb a few things. And it eventually leads to climbing up this 60-foot telephone pole, like this one. Now imagine climbing up that pole, 60 feet, and then figuring out how to get yourself to stand on top of it, right? I mean, that's just enough. But then you got to leap out to that bar, like this next picture right here. And Andrea got about 2/3 up the telephone pole, and she said, I can't do it, I'm scared. And so later on, we were sitting around the campfire, kind of talking about stuff. And there was a few people that went through the ropes course. And one girl had climbed up the telephone pole and leaped out and said, so what gave you the courage to do that? And she said, well, you know, when we started out, we were on kind of those lower kind of things that you had to do to walk on the bar. She said, I really pushed it, and I fell a lot. And every time I fell, the harness held me. And I learned to trust it. So by the time I got to the telephone pole, it was a piece of cake. I didn't have any butterflies at all. I knew that if I fell, the harness would hold me. And I leaped out, and sure enough, I was on it. So I asked Andrea, I said, well, what did you do? She said, I played it safe. I never pushed it. I never fell once. They told me the harness would hold me, but I never experienced it. And so when I got up that telephone pole and I was ready to do something big, I couldn't do it. That's how life's supposed to be. You're supposed to trust in the Lord with all of your heart. And you're not supposed to lean on your own understanding. That's just going to get you in trouble. But in all your ways, acknowledge him. He's going to talk to you along the way. He's going to give you some ideas about how to live this journey. It's going to be small steps at first. But as you learn to trust the safety harness, that should you fall, he will catch you. God will give you bigger and bigger and greater and more exciting things to do on the journey. Let me tell you about some people that have done this. Let's get to the next picture. Some of you might remember the Baileys, and Ryan and Nikki Bailey and their 3 kids. Ryan and Nikki both met the Lord just before they came to Cornerstone. They ended up coming here. I did their wedding, so it's been a lot of years ago. They were both baptized right up here, up on the stage. Ryan was going to CU at the time, ended up getting a degree in, I think, architecture, engineering, worked for an architecture firm for a while. But then the Lord began to kind of whisper things in their ears about the adventure. And eventually they believed that God was saying that they should go and go to a different country. And it got more specific. It got to be Cambodia. And they began to pray. And it took many, many years for them to take that leap off that pole. Because it's a lot, to just turn your life upside down like that. And to go from this nice, secure, living situation and salary to faith support. And now, 3 years ago or so, they packed up, and now they live in Cambodia, and they lead this group. These are all young kids and older kids that have been rescued off the street in Cambodia. Of course, there's a lot of human trafficking that goes on in Cambodia, and they do discipleship. That's what they do. Here's the next picture. This is Carl Jonker. You probably remember Carl. That's his wife, Sigalit. Carl made a deadly mistake when he came to go to CU. He ended up coming here to Cornerstone. Carl was raised in a godly family, and he was headed to work for the CIA. That's what he wanted to do. And so when he graduated, he applied for that. But then through coming here and a little bit about his own background, he had a number of friends that were Jewish. Most of his friends growing up were Jewish. Some were Orthodox. He had visited Israel once before. He comes to Cornerstone. He thinks he hears the Lord saying something a little different, and he's confused about it, right? Maybe I should do something in Israel. And it ended up, the CIA thing ended up not working out, and that was kind of like, the safety harness now is really holding him secure. And sure enough, we figure out how to get Carl to Israel. He went over there to help one of the congregations over there with Aviv Mizrahi and Adonai Roi, but also to work on a degree at the University of Tel Aviv. He got a degree in Middle East Studies. He's really become an expert on Syria and Iraq. He was even interviewed last week by Channel 2 in Israel about what's going on in Syria. He married this beautiful Israeli believer named Sigalit, whose family's origins go back to India. And he's living the dream, even hiding in shelters the last week or so because of the bombs that are going on. It's just a totally different life. He's just hanging on to that safety harness right now. That's Carl. Here is, who we got here? Bottom left is Maggie Hart. Her claim to fame is that she's the sister of Sean Hart, tall Sean that hosts up here once in a while, is on staff with us. And Maggie has just always wanted to write and produce film, and so sure enough, about 5 years ago, she did just that. She began a journey to make a film that would bless people and use her creative arts to do that and to meet people along the way. And about 2 weeks ago, she had a private premiere of this film, and she's applied to have this shown at the Sundance Festival, and she's just living the dream as well, using the gifts that God has given her. And she says that along the way, the Lord has given her so many relationships who ask her about her faith using this film, and there's even some that have come to Cornerstone and attended because of that, and beginning a new journey of faith through that. So her, by the way, her film is called Impressions. Look for it. Hopefully it'll get picked up if she gets into the Sundance Festival. And then here we have Dan Lance. Dan Lance, you've seen him lead worship up here a few times. But several years ago, Dan was out on a morning run. It was still dark out, or it was just becoming light. And he says that it's always been eerie for him, that darkness to light, that the difference, the contrast between dark and light, and that the light that's emerging is like the hope of the world, that light for him translated into hope. And he was running one morning, and he heard a rooster crow. And he had heard that so many times on his runs in the morning, but for some reason that morning, it was like a revelation. The rooster was a sound of hope. Dawn is coming. The light is coming. And he thought he heard the Lord say, go and start this ministry using your creative abilities, to use music to help fund projects around the world to help those who are at risk and marginalized in the world. So he started the Rooster Party. We had one of them here last year, and lately he's gone around and he's creating groups in different cities that have this same concept. Just all these people, just ordinary people. Here's another group. I was selling nuts and bolts 30 years ago. That's what I did for a living. Fasteners. When I met the Lord. And then the Lord began to whisper in my ear things about, I have a plan for you, a plan to prosper you, to give you a future and a hope. It was different than what I was doing. And I didn't know what it was. And I actually liked doing what I was doing. I mean, I enjoyed that. I made a pretty good living on that, but I was hearing something different. And then Andrew and I took a small step of faith. We went on a short-term mission trip with our church to India. And it was during that trip that I was running on top of the roof of the hotel we were staying in Mumbai. It was called Bombay back then, but it was Mumbai, where I distinctly heard the Lord say, I want you to go into full-time ministry. I never thought I'd be here. I never even wanted to be here. But the harness has held me all these years. And it will hold you as well. The journey is first and foremost a path to life. You got to recognize that we all have this attitude of know-it-all. We think we know everything, but we have to grow up and realize that we have to seek wisdom outside of ourselves, and that wisdom comes from the Lord as He gives us healthy boundaries to live in and shows us a way to live that is not boring. If you're living a boring life, you are not on the journey. It should be exciting. I'm not saying God's going to send you somewhere, because a lot of people do exciting things right here, but He is going to give you a different reason to live and to breathe. And so by way of an application, as the rest of the worship, we just doing a little... I love this guy. He meant Jesus. Rabbi Jesus is here today too. As we sing this last worship song, I'm going to invite those that want to come forward to take a step of faith. This is going to be a small step today. Maybe you were like me 33 years ago when I walked into a church. That's all I did was just go my own way. I leaned on my own understanding. That's all I did. I didn't even know there was a different way. And so maybe you want to come forward and just come forward. It's just, I'm not going to do anything creepy up here. I'm not even going to pray for you. This is just your step of faith to come down and say, I want to do it differently. I want to start seeking wisdom outside of myself. Or maybe you have already taken that step of faith and you need to have a different step of faith to come forward and say, look, I'm missing something because my life feels really boring. It doesn't have a whole lot of meaning and purpose to it. And so this is one step of faith I want to take this morning. This is where I would begin to acknowledge God in all my ways and everything that I do. Invite him into places. Maybe there's some places, there's rooms where you've invited the Lord into your heart, but there's still some rooms where you say, no, I'm not going to let you come in there. Whatever that may be, then you take a step of faith and come on down and just join the others that will just come around here, maybe kneel on the steps or just stand here and worship and just ask the Lord to be your harness, your safety harness. For the future steps he's going to ask you to take, he will speak to you. As you read the word and you read about this wisdom, these healthy boundaries, as you invite the Holy Spirit to come into your life and speak to you, God will lead you down an exciting journey. So let me pray. Father, I pray you'd use this time. It'd be special. Holy Spirit, I pray you'd come and fall on us, God. Invade our hearts, Lord. Invade our thoughts. Give us courage to stand up on top of that telephone pole and jump. Morning just to take a step to come down front and say that's what I want. So come on, let's stand up. And as you feel led, just make your way down here.